Good evening, everyone, and welcome. It's wonderful to have almost a full house for this Friday evening. It's perhaps a testament to the importance of this annual lecture, which was begun in July 2003, the year Geoffrey Bawa passed away, to commemorate his birthday, that it has now become a hallmark of the architectural calendar here in Colombo. And over the years, we have had many distinguished speakers, including Kengo Kuma, Marina Tabusam, Tatiana Bilbao, Abalamba, Kerry Hill, Mokwe Wei, and many others. Tonight, we are privileged to have Anupama Kundoo as the 21st speaker in our Geoffrey Bawa Memorial Series. The lecture is an opportunity to hear about the practice of an architect from outside Sri Lanka in their own words, and maintains the ethos of Geoffrey's vision for the Trust as an institution that furthers and fosters the disciplines of architecture, art, and ecology. We are delighted that tonight's lecture will be followed by a special event tomorrow morning, organized specifically for younger architects and architecture students, where Anupama will discuss the interplay between pedagogy and practice in a question and answer format. The session is part of the Trust's deep commitment to work closely with our architectural community and reflect upon the research and ultimately engage with our built environment through multiple modes of practice. Our offices, archives, and library are moving into a new facility, which will open publicly at the end of this year as a newly christened Geoffrey Bawa Space for Architecture, Art, and Ecology, which is housed in a 1958 home designed by Bawa on Horton Place. Our commitment to the ideas about Sri Lanka, South Asia, and the world will continue to be our mission, with a variety of programs for all of you. So we hope to see you there as many times as possible in the months to come. Before I invite our Chief Curator, Shayari De Silva, to introduce Anupama, I want to conclude this welcome address by thanking Mr. Miles Young, who for many years has generously supported this lecture, in fact, from the very beginning, as well as our media partners, the Daily Mirror, Daily Mirror and Sunday Times. So once again, welcome everyone to the 21st Geoffrey Bawa Memorial Lecture, and over to you, Shari.
Thank you, Chana. And indeed, we are delighted to have Anupama Kundoo with us this evening. Born in Pune, India, Anupama graduated from the University of Mumbai in 1989 and received her PhD degree from TU Berlin in 2008. Her research-oriented practice started in 1990 in Oroville and has generated architecture with people at the center. Based on spatial and material research for low environmental impact, this work has always sought to be socially and economically beneficial. Her body of work was the subject of a solo exhibition entitled Taking Time at the Louisiana Museum of Modern Art in Denmark in 2021. In 2020, her work was published in a dedicated volume of the Architect's Studio series by Lars Müller Publishers. She has taught architecture and urban management at various international universities, including Yale and Columbia, which has strengthened her expertise in rapid urbanization and climate change-related development issues. She is currently professor at TU Berlin, Germany, and the Norman Foster Visiting Professor of Architecture at Yale University. Anupama has received numerous accolades in recognition of the strength of her work, including the Reba Charles Jenks Award for her contribution to architectural theory, the 2021 Auguste Perret Prize for Architectural Technology, the 2021 Building New Sense Now Global Award of the German Sustainable Building Council, and the Global Award for Sustainable Architecture under UNESCO patronage in 2022. Her studios are based in Berlin in Germany and Pondicherry in India. Kundoo's rigorous research and experimentation in new materiality for architecture results from questioning basic assumptions and construction habits that people have adapted adopted during the long process of industrialization. Rather than focusing on shortage, she seeks abundance through investing in human resources and human resourcefulness, such as ingenuity, time, skills, care, and a sense of community. Just before we welcome her, I would also like to remind our audience to please turn their phones off or on silent, and we will follow the lecture with questions from you, as well as refreshments outside. And now, without further ado, please welcome Anupama Kundoo.
Good evening. I have been absorbed in Geoffrey Bawa's work, having spent the last hours and all of yesterday in just basking in his what spaces he created, that I have to take some time to reconnect to my own lecture and come back to my own work. I want to thank you all from the Geoffrey Bawa Trust for having invited me and for giving me this great opportunity to stay at his house. It's been really, really amazing. You know, I have visited most of his work and also his house, but I have to say that, you know, living there and noticing just the life that is at the center of his work. I'm going to try to share a little bit of my own journey, that where I find common ground, and see that how, you know, architects in diverse contexts in different periods of time are somehow seeking the same thing about creating spaces that enable life to be as soothing as possible for humans, and in not only in the way the spaces work for everyday life, but also in the processes that are behind how architecture is built and created. So I wanted to introduce my projects through a journey. Let me just figure where the slide is. There's the, sorry. Should I just click back? This? Okay. So the slide that wasn't showing, just a minute. Yeah, here. I've chosen the title Rethinking Materiality because even though architecture's essence lies in the voids and the parts that we don't build, through which we connect to the outdoors, to the sky, etc., in the times in which we produce architecture, it is the materiality of architecture that seems to be problematic. And a lot of that has to do with the post-industrial way of mass producing architecture, etc., which we all know about. But I wanted to shift the discussion of materiality away from the actual materials to the making of the architecture. So I prefer to not speak from a position of panic that the world is ending, the finite materials are running out, because actually my work is not inspired by the fear of those shortages. Rather, I would like to shift the discussion on rethinking materiality to the human potential to do better. So therefore, just like as much as the natural resources are finite, human resources are infinite. And I have, you know, you mentioned in the introduction that I have sought abundance even when there were little means. And I mean, I wasn't, the narrative of the West about our countries is about how we are poor countries or we have less resources, etc., is not actually that was not our narrative when we grew up, because we weren't, I think, counting all those things. But at the same time, we are householding the resources. And householding has to do with the way the human is deciding what to buy and what to make, how often to eat out and how much to eat at home. And all those decisions that I think I have always looked at this problem of materiality in the age of climate change as an opportunity to celebrate human ingenuity, like we have always seen in architecture. We've seen how the capacity of humans to be clever, to care, to repair, to just produce amazing things, to discover the laws of gravity and all the other laws which materiality makes visible to us. And through the cultivation of our eye, through the cultivation of our hands, to be able to cultivate ourselves while we make architecture. So for me, when I see how sustainability has become a kind of buzzword which has come up with another checklist and another standardized approach like the industrial architecture, it's again, for me, a bit like missing the point. And therefore, I want to talk about, not about the virtues of mud versus cement and all these polarized things, but I want to talk about the architecture that we deserve as humans, you know, to realize that our human resources are infinite, how clever we can be, how much we can use our memory, our time. These are not things that run out, you know. And yes, even time. I think if you slow down, you also have more time. And there is no need to rush about or to feel the amount of shortage we feel in areas that are actually not running out. So my talk is going to be about rethinking materiality through celebrating human resourcefulness. And if you spend more time, you land up saving other resources. You know, like if you do something manually, you save energy. And more than all those plus minuses, you create a fulfilling life because what we make makes us. And I think it's really important to see who we become as a consequence of what we are making. So my architecture, I would like to explain through that. And I would like, since my practice is about 33 years old, I started immediately after I graduated. And I have been contemplating on how we got from a situation where we built architecture out of whatever was lying around. If there is wood, you built with wood. If you're in a desert and there are no trees, you figured out how to build with earth to make domes. So in every context, if you have ice, you build with ice. We humans are adaptable and materials are everywhere. And there's no need to create a polarization between a good material and a bad material. Material is everywhere. Very fine, very refined architecture or very common architecture has been created by the amount of time and engagement that the humans made with what was lying around. And I wondered always how we got from there to here, because I grew up in Bombay, and I, you know, having been taught architecture and having been taught old British ways of, you know, doing brick masonry and watching beside that none of that was referring to our old traditional architecture. So we were neither taught that, nor were we taught about what was actually happening in the developer-driven landscape around us. So it prompted me to think a lot on my own about what is really going on. And I keep still contemplating, and I wonder how, in the background, you have a landscape of the over-standardized, you know, the BHK version of housing, which is more about real estate than habitat. And and it's not only common to India, but even it could be New York or Madrid or wherever it is, that cities that are rapidly urbanizing in their peripheries, everywhere you have a situation that an apartment or a habitat, it is increasingly expensive to acquire, and for all the money that is spent, and you manage to pay for it by the end of your life, mostly, it's not even a nice one. So it's like you wonder what's happening. In the foreground, everyone who cannot afford that is called informal. And it's really a dilemma. Every time I look at this picture, you know that people are always living in these double standard, two different cities in one. And actually, you don't know which one is more oppressive, because it's not that like either of them respond to the needs. And so starting with that and moving on to questioning what is vernacular, what is modern, what is standard, what kind of norms are being written, so that what kind of habits are being created, and how difficult it is to unwrite some of those norms, and where we ourselves lose contact as architects to the actual material, making models and renderings even increasingly more in that direction now, where we have no sense of how materials work, the gravity, how it's operating, what is going to stand or not, and increasingly becoming dependent on consultants and nobody taking the real responsibility, and then everybody on the site not getting along, all those problems. So the practice has been very difficult. But right from the beginning, I tried to teach myself all those things that I felt that the architecture school is not giving us. So just keeping some kind of hope and aspiration, always fueling that in myself. I didn't expect where my practice would go. And when I dropped out of the rat race in Bombay and I just started exploring the rural areas in my country and landed in Auroville, I knew what had not to be done, or at least not by me, but I didn't know that just by simply rejecting all the things that my consciousness told me not to do, no matter how difficult your livelihood would be, what kind of risk you put yourself in, I'm really glad that I persisted. So I can't show the projects that led to my success, because all the projects that I said no to, or the ones they said no to me, all that didn't happen are behind, I think, where my profession, where I have reached. And therefore, I also want to share with you that I often thought this question, about everything that I did. I always wondered, what is the point of doing efficiently things that need not be done at all? And that's also behind the kind of work I do, because a lot of this busy life and rushing about here and there, and the post-industrial life is about being efficient. Being so efficient that you have no time to think if you don't need the entire thing. And you only have time to think about it when you've retired. And then you've spent your life. And you're too formed. But I have thought about it from the beginning. So the whole thing I did when I began my practice was to buy the time and to reduce the cost of living, take all the risks on my normal life, but to save my mind and to be, not engaged in projects or working in offices where I would be not I would be asked to dumb myself down and not to think, don't ask inconvenient questions and all of that. So through going on asking this question, I started looking for answers in the world around me. With my motorbike, I would go around the areas and just take a simple thing which we took for granted, like brick. And that because we did so much of learning mecche and brick bonds and all that kind of thing in the first few years of architecture, we had learned to glorify the wire-cut brick of Louis Kahn and look down upon our own traditional bricks and its irregularities and so on. But just by spending time discovering those things, I started discovering the the things we took for granted, every field, everywhere where the earth clay is suitable, people make small quantities of brick. And we always saw all that when you drove by car in our childhood, etc., and wondered what are these people making out of nothing, because mud was like nothing, and then there was something coming out of it, which would last forever. The oldest bricks are 3,800 years ago, and they are still bricks. So whatever green standards are rejecting them, I wasn't believing that this much energy, so many kilojoules, whatever. It's, I wanted to go to the bottom of that. And I realized that these people who are producing traditional bricks through fuel, that is through cutting the thinnings of things that they planted themselves, where these plantations are actually quite clever because they are growing casuarina to be used as scaffolding, and the thinner branches are used as fuel. And those people who are probably doing this lime making and brick making are doing it in certain seasons, and the rest of the time they are growing rice perhaps. And so when you buy one of the elements from them locally, then it's not that they're working 8 hours in a regular oven, in the industrial way of making bricks. And that's where I realized that it's not the numbers, it is the whole human cycle and how humans are deeply interconnected, or there are interrelationships between everything they do in a territory. And so I realized that the first problem is the actual sourcing of the material from scratch. So people have done, I started looking at livelihoods, and I've started looking at actually how clever, talking about efficiency, how efficient is any pre-industrial product almost. The bricks are irregular, I learned years later, that they are so efficient because they may be slightly weaker than the factory ones, but they are not, we always thought it was because of bad workmanship or whatever. It is because they are molding it on the ground, right on the ground, and when they don't make bricks, it's a field again. So the ground is uneven, so one side of the bricks are uneven. You can also use the other side. But there are simple things that are not talked about, but I discovered, and I started being fascinated with how efficient is an oven that is the brick stack, and how people and communities who have done only this for generations, are overnight going to be displaced because of mere habits. Like, for example, none of us young architects who were prescribing Portland cement were conscious of the fact that lime would work just as well. We did it out of habit because they made us write those specifications of Portland cement and all the proportions. And it's just habits we created, and we felt like we had no control. If I use lime, I don't know. This lime is different from that lime. This clay is different from that clay. And we just felt lost, because actually what we were doing is not taking responsibility. Because in the traditional way, they all took the responsibility. The masons took their part. Everybody took their part. So the more I dug, I went deeper and deeper. And I'm still only asking questions. And I realized that in today's time, if you try to build projects with what is lying around, literally around your site, because I think that my definition of architecture was trying to build the perfect voids and compose those spaces and their relationship to the windows and the outdoors. But the materiality became important because the modern materials were reflecting complicated values, and they were leaving a different imprint on the architecture. And along with it were a lot of unconscious habits where it didn't make sense, starting with the fact that the reinforced cement concrete slab is actually heating up the house, and then you have to artificially cool it inside. So because I couldn't afford a house in the beginning and I lived in a hut, I discovered such a basic fact, not in architecture school, but looking at my thatch hut being much cooler than some of those, I started looking for roofing systems and so on. So everywhere, if I didn't follow the emperor's new clothes indoctrination or whatever we are told, if you actually question the narratives, everything was collapsing. So I realized that we don't have to find answers, just ask questions. And I realized if you try to use a material literally from the ground around you, not in the West, they'll tell you it's impossible. They'll tell you it's impossible, it's very expensive. They'll tell you it's more expensive if you engage humans. It's better to engage machines. But even in India, we are told the same narrative. So to do some of these houses, it was not a defiance. It was like, let's do the math and find out if it's expensive. Thanks to all that, in the end, I learned how to do engineering. I learned how to do contractor's job. Then we became the contractor. Then we became the engineer. I mean, it just built knowledge in the end. Asking questions built knowledge. And when you do the math, you realize it's not more expensive. Sometimes it's more expensive. Sometimes it's not. You literally have to do the math. All those generalizations are perhaps not true. So my motto became to question all assumptions and find out what are the assumptions and verify them as you go along. And then each little project empowered me to do the next one. And I started using, in a place like Auroville, I've produced a whole palette of buildings, whether it's with local stone, like this, for example. This is being, even now, hand extracted. And I'm not against machines. I was fascinated to figure out what is the real economy, not only in money terms, but in the whole way of doing a thing, and how clever it is when you watch them because of the nature of the stone, how they split the slab, how they take it out, etc. And I started applying to this kind of knowledge and discoveries, refusing to use certain materials and that I was finding out more about. I was trying to produce interiors or architecture with all the new discoveries. And I realized, for example, this project, the granite slab is molded. In the space, it looks like a ribbon. It just looks like it's floating and the floor is rising. It's a situation where we are showcasing handmade products. So I have placed it through the engineering of these slabs. The slab is actually held by those two leaning slabs, and they are held on the ground by loose stones. So when the exhibition was done, it was only on for 2 weeks. And people were saying, why don't you do everything in plywood? Because everything, which would have been slightly cheaper, 20% cheaper only, it would all have been thrown away after 2 weeks. Whereas all of this was sold and reused because we designed modular joints, and you can put it everywhere. The stone is going to be a stone. Years and thousands of years later, it will be the same. It can be indoor, it can be outdoor. So I started looking at time because of not only weathering, but what is the term? How many years are they budgeting those economic figures over? How can you compete with stone and brick? I was wondering, why are they even arguing, So all of this is conditionings. And so when I started, for example, with the brick examples I showed you, I realized that wherever there's clay, wherever there's terracotta roofs or so on, that there must be clay that is good for being used fired. So I myself, because I was living in a thatch hut, as I told you, I realized that I don't want to repeat a reinforced concrete slab. And by the way, for this house, for my own house, which you will see now, I landed up doing my own engineering, which really, I didn't start out in architecture school, but I had to do it because the engineers were telling me it won't work. Whatever I showed engineers, they were saying this won't work, that won't work. And then I realized that better don't change the design, but change the engineer. Today my motto is, if someone tells me that it won't work, I'm going to change the engineer. But I was too young at the time. I thought they know something, and then I realized literally all they were doing, all the consultants were only discouraging me. And that was a bit eerie. And I realized anyone who discourages anyone should be shut away, And then we did load tests. So because it's good, I'm telling all the young students here, step out of the comfort zone. Nothing is going to happen. It's not going to be like the whole building fell. Gravity is not like a storm that happened once in a while. If it stood, it will stand. In that minute, if it didn't fall, it won't fall. It's immediate, it's accurate, nothing happens. So all of these assurances I didn't get. It just helped me to be more empowered, and it helped the Masons to be empowered. It helped us all to work as a team and teach ourselves the things we were aspiring to know. And my idea at that time, because we had less resources, I realized it was mostly cement and steel that was in short supply. So no matter how much industrialized techniques are feeding our subconscious, we have to understand if steel and cement are high energy materials and they are in short supply, we have to try to not use those in the roof. So if the roofs are efficient, then the columns are lighter and so on. And I realized that, so in this kind of a roof, for example, it's the same material of the terracotta tile, but we are doing away with all the substructure, all the wood that we no longer have. And we are using, we're using those materials, we're using them cleverly. The product is insulated because it's a whole tube, and so many advantages. And also, I grew up in a modernist influenced, I was influenced by the early modern movement in my aesthetics. I wasn't comfortable in everything that vernacular houses were offering us. They were dark for me. There were those small spans were, they were not always creating, very good. If you didn't have those little courtyards and you had very dark interiors with this kind of earth-colored materials. So I was exploring all of this. So I was trying to emphasize the quest for new ways to work with age-old materials, time-tested materials, and not on just focusing on new materials, but focusing on new ways to be able to address the shortage of resources by attempting to build way more square meters of architecture with the same amounts of material given, to stretch more. So that happened, and I started applying, the strategy was to use engineering and to use knowledge to be able to push the envelope. So I started, I realized very early on that the building of the knowledge and building community was the process, and the building of architecture was the product. And somehow I became very interested if it was like an addiction to learn more. And even now I have that. I want to know exactly how much material you need for that thing to stand. I don't want to waste materials, not only because of the environmental, moral aspect, but only because as we want to know how much is really needed to counter gravity. So through that and through these interests in realizing that the people who use architecture, who are interested in the voids, and the people who make architecture, who are interested in the material part, everybody's livelihoods are somehow intertwined with architecture. And I started, from this, this is my first project, okay? I've put it out there so you can see how much I don't know. You can see on my face how lost I am. But I was not worried, about making mistakes. Somewhere, I felt that it's not to be, one doesn't have to fear failure, because I wasn't trying to just do something different for its own sake, but I was trying to make something with whoever is there and whatever is there. And actually, today when I see this image, I don't see there is nothing. I was a Bombayite who has just come down there to South India, and I didn't see any materials around me, so I was looking what to build my first project with. But today when I look at it, I see, in the foreground there is earth, that's a material. In the background there are people who are potters, and those are the skills. And this is a lot. Today I go everywhere and I see that everywhere you go, there is a lot of things. And if you use what is already there, you will create abundance. If you try to bring something what is not there, you will create poverty or you'll create some minus. So through these methods, I started producing very high quality products because I had met Ray Meeker by then, whom I'll tell you a bit more about as we go along. But he's a ceramist who is a Californian settled in Pondicherry, and he was experimenting with firing large-scale mud houses in situ, and he needed products to be cooked inside it, and I needed products to be made, and I used to always go to him to find out how can I make this quality better. Even though I'm going to work in the rural conditions, I wanted to not do them in a I wanted to do it like the brick are done out in the field, because I realized that's where the economy lies. We don't have to create workshops and bad conditions for people to go and hate their job but just build how they are doing it. And so through them, through that support and through the craftsmen who were quite fearless, I have to say, and excited like me, we managed to build, I managed in a very early period to build quite nice buildings that were, they were aligned with the kind of values I had. And this is the wall house, which became very known later. But this whole wall house was a celebration of that local brick, which people didn't trust. The bricks are sometimes, it's 1 inch thick, or it can vary up to 2 inch, depending on the irregularity of it. And I created patterns where it will be flattering, etc. And I decided not to plaster the wall to show that my discovery, that I had discovered that the bad brick is a good brick and the good brick is a bad brick. So that is my reversed attitude, to take what is there, and if it is a little weaker, doesn't matter, you make the walls a bit thicker and then your climate is better and everything. It's like going back to the future in a way. But this is built with lime mortar, but the lime mortar has 10% of cement to keep up with the setting speed and so on. So it was a very slow way of discovering what is around, and each community that I got to know, like for example, when I got to know the potters, I found a way to use the local pots that they were actually struggling to sell. I realized that since urbanization is threatening their livelihood, I wanted to create roofing systems and architectural elements that they could divert their skills towards, rather than selling these pots. Nobody's going to go away from steel utensils anytime soon. So I wanted to see how can those things lead to architectural solutions, and how could their livelihoods be guaranteed rather than threatened, and how the architecture, that contemporary architecture, was creating there. And because there was a city to build in Auroville, I thought it would be good to have a palette of systems that we can use. So as we grow, there are skills growing and a kind of language for architecture in the place. And for example, I found a way to, influenced by Laurie Baker, I realized that if you can deepen this waffle slab system, if it's deeper, through this spot, you create a lost formwork where when you pour concrete in it, you could increase the span between your steel bars. Like you can skip 2 bars of steel for every 3, which is a lot of steel in the whole economy. So I tried to push some things which Laurie Baker had tried and others, and I tried to understand those things and I tried to make them more efficient and kept working on the engineering. This lost formwork allows you to cast ceilings without fancy slabs, without expensive infrastructure. You can just use some clay up to the lip of the pot and wash it away later. So you get a perfectly clean slab. Then on top of it, you don't need to demold, you don't need to plaster, paint, nothing, and you have a clean ceiling. So many people don't realize that all of this has got some kind of, it's not an ornamental thing, but still the imprint, the hand impressions of all the hands that were working on architecture continue to be included And I think contemporary architecture, in many of my projects, I feel it is very well anchored to the place because the materials are from the place and the skills are visible. So that even if the space is contemporary, then still the architecture belongs. And through one thing led to another, and I started extruding terracotta, slightly trapezoidal in this case, pieces to produce architecture, like roofing slabs for upper levels, because these kind of vaults don't allow you to use the ceiling, and you can't use the terrace on top of it. So you lose that. So it's very efficient, but then you can't use the space. So I created more and more systems. That filler slab I showed you is for intermediate slabs where you don't need insulation. This one is an insulated slab, but it could be used on the left side is a ground floor structure, or other shapes where you don't want to have a vault. Whereas intermediary slabs could have this. So I started creating, even though you see this one wall house, or you see the screens here, it was actually a palette of building elements with which architecture could be combined. And all the experiments with the flooring, the recycled wood, and all kinds of things from belonging to the problems or reflecting the fact that I considered the problems of the place and the immediate negotiations between handmade, machine-made, local material, what you're bringing in with high energy. And all of those, like these granite slabs, trying to replace ceramic tiles that are industrial, because a truck has to come into a small place just to deliver those few things that you're going to get from somewhere. And then that will eventually become your road. That'll probably become a highway one day, because the telephone line will go there. Nobody's planned anything, but these gestures we do, they start shaping even big things, including how those roads become. So very careful steps were taken to teach myself those things that I needed to learn and widen my knowledge. But meanwhile, in my very first project, I mentioned the thatch hut. So this is the thatch hut where I lived. I thought that I will live here for even a year. I thought I had come from Bombay, and I thought it will last, even if it lasts a year, it will be still fine, because I get 1 year to be an architect without worrying about my bills, or without surrendering to need so much, to arrange your life around all those habitual costs. But I lived here for about 10 years, and I realized while living in this house as well that the beauty of round wood as opposed to timber is that, again, the time factor. If you want to cut a rectangular section of the same amount, you would have to cut a much bigger tree many, many more years later. Whereas in 2 or 3 years, this casuarina, by the way, which is used only as scaffolding, the whole house is made out of that, because that's the affordable way. So I did a quick calculation, and I had felt that even if you can use it for a few years, it still makes sense. But I realized, unlike cement and concrete and all of that, these natural materials, they have different life cycles, like the thatch has to be renewed every 3 years. The wood, if you didn't renew your thatch, then your round wood or the coconut rope joint will rot. But even if it does, you can still replace that one piece. So I realized that there are all of these, there are no fixed, there's no fixed lifetime. It has to do with the maintenance and how much you're willing to engage. So anyway, the time spent in this house helped me to learn the value of time, and to realize that the most important thing is to liberate your time, so that time is the most important resource that we are spending, probably not spending properly. And I think for the whole idea of that efficiency was so that we have more time. But where is the time? Where did that time go, when we try to hurry up? And when each time you have a washing machine, so you don't have to wash yourself, and I'm not suggesting we go back, but we are not enjoying the time, and we are not using the time to think before we act. When you ask people, even in universities, very often, everybody's stressed and rushing about. So nobody actually is taking the time to think. Forget about rethink. There's no time. So I realized that first thing for me was to create time and question things, because if you have the time, you take a little more time to do the solution. But all the time you invest, it all comes back. You do other things quicker because you deeply know, you learn things which you don't only rely on consultants for. And then I started also in other projects like this co-housing project, we started realizing that the time of people to participate in the construction of their project, like whereas on one end of the spectrum, you know, the birds and the bees, they just build their house in a few days and they get on with their lives, whereas humans are trying till their deathbed to recover the cost of the house, which they don't even like. So that is where the whole thing has gone. But if you can, in urban areas, create the possibility that people can do some work, 10 or 20% of the cost, 10%, if they can put in through work, paint something, you know, carry some materials. If you don't use technology to alienate the people, and if there are some things that anybody can do, then you'll end up having a situation where you can actually make housing affordable, because the 10% which you have to go to the bank with, which many people don't have, they could actually give it through the sweat equity, you know. And so these are concepts that I have been working with. In this case, there was rammed earth walls that we had, used. We didn't build the whole project out of rammed earth, but we needed to, by that time, we started looking at the holistic site. We had to do a wastewater treatment plant. So the earth that we dug out, only that much we spend. The rest of the house is made with other materials, the rest of the housing. So, as we did larger projects, we enlarged our experience and our work started extending onto green infrastructure, energy, generating energy, generating water through treatment, and including all of that inside quite humble projects with very small budgets, actually. So these are, this is an example of the extruded trapezoidal form, because in this case, again, the roof is a large umbrella protecting us from the rain, and the sunshades are separate. These are the slabs that are not touching the window, but there's a little bit of space for the hot air to go away. So the sun is being shielded separately from the rain, and so on. But it is a larger housing project, this one, urban eco-community. So by then, to do experimentation became very normal for me. It was, even we never had any research budget or anything, we managed to use all our time and our knowledge to be able to afford a little bit of research in every project, but in a way that whatever we were doing could be a prototype for other projects for that region. But the most radical project I probably did was this idea, which is pioneered by Ray Meeker, called baked in situ earth architecture. I coined that term because I did my PhD many, many years later in Berlin on this topic. I had also done 3 buildings with this technology. The idea is that all these, the old ovens that I talked about, I talked about how bricks are made on the field, but industrial bricks are usually fired in ovens where about 40% of the energy goes into the kiln wall every firing. Each time you fire, you're losing that much energy. So Ray Meeker's idea is to use the house as a kiln, to build a mud house with mud mortar, to design holes in the bottom for air to come in for combustion, to have fire boxes. So there's a kind of construction for the house to first function as an oven, fill it with bricks, and those bricks or other ceramic products, that all the cost of firing could be attributed to the products, and the 40% of heat, which would, because it's 980 degrees, it's really hot, so the heat loss would become a heat gain, and the mud walls will become ceramic. Of course, it's easier said than done, and he did 20 long years of research to make that technique viable. And such a house is then insulated with cow dung, rice husk, and so on. But it is then fired for 3 or 4 days, depending on the size of the project, and the brick gets vitrified and becomes a permanently waterproof, from mud brick to ceramic. And then after the house is cooled for 2 or 3 days, you can harvest those products and sell it. And theoretically, at least, the house is for free, because it's the only material has been spent. The heat has been tapped, and he's discovered combustible insulations. Long story, very technical thing. But with so much commitment, he has managed to really enlarge what is possible. And here, for example, you see, you could make any bricks of any size. I made this with our initials because all the brick makers, this R and A is for Ray and my initial. All the brick makers have a stamp with their initials on it. So we did that as well. But basically what it does is, what it has done is it has taken a mud house, and the house is cooked and completely become waterproof. And for me, that's why I did the PhD, was because if the big difference of taking the fire, instead of taking the bricks to the oven in the industrial process, if you're taking the fire to the site instead, all the socio-economic implications change. The house, instead of becoming a consumer of building materials, it becomes a producer of local materials. And along with brick, a whole lot of things which we use in everyday architecture, that is ceramic, from tiles to gutters, water spouts, toilet pans, wash basins, all kinds of things can be put in there. This is Ray's work. And in the terracotta pieces you saw in my architecture were also produced to some extent inside his fired houses. So that's how I think collaboration and working with others who are doing things is a much more intelligent way than doing competition and having the solo person, taking all the responsibility for things they don't know entirely about in today's times. So the house, these were homes for homeless children. It was practically with no budget, it was created. But, even the final finishing was in keeping with the spirit of the project, was using waste tiles to waterproof the surfaces after they were built. So I'm going to now just touch upon another group. I've covered 2 areas, in my material research. One was about using age-old material in new ways. Then the other is about optimizing vernacular, like the round wood, etc., to be able to, further optimize those things. And the third is about using materials, manufactured materials, but also optimizing them. So instead of spending a lot of, in heavy RCC construction, I had taken interest in ferrocement. And I think in a lot of areas where climate change is going to come, destroy a lot of homes, etc., waterproof cement is also something very, very important. And I don't like to create and feed the, demonizing cement and so on. I just feel that one should try to optimize our research on high energy materials. And this is an example of that, where the steel we use is significantly less. So you're using chicken mesh instead of thick reinforcement bars. And I continue to develop meshes and research in ferrocement. These are all not worked out, but I keep researching these things because I think this is a material of the future. We've got some panels made in glass fiber. There is also work with carbon fiber and, textile reinforcement that is going to be considered in the future so that they are not rusting over time. And then you will not need so much cover and you can make much more thin elements. So in order to use ferrocement, we need to have, the principle is because the element is so thin, it needs to be folded and bended just like thin paper origami, this kind of architecture which teaches us about folding and strengthening thin elements. So this is one example called the fulfill home, in which 1-inch thick elements are folded as boxes to make them rigid in order to quickly plug into slabs in high-rise or to create, all of these works were inspired after the tsunami happened. And we see that in our haste, we produce sometimes things that where you wonder if the resources were spent well. So we took a lot of time to produce housing that could be put up in a short time, but the thinking and developing took years to do. But even the finishes are using like those old IPS elements with pigments and so on, waxed surfaces, or even just polished cement. So this kind of a system is one example of that. This is, in this case, an office. The other was a home. But also in all of these, I took the lessons of the brick making into even the architecture made with modern materials. The social sustainability strategy was to consider if these materials could be produced in the backyards of masons' houses, because they are modular. In any 2-meter balcony or any extra place, people can cast, like a household material, teach their children how to do it. Somehow it's a very versatile material, and it's available. These materials of mesh are available everywhere, in every remote area, because it's called chicken mesh. Even in agricultural areas, you find these materials. You need such little steel. So I started producing all of this, and this is the Fulfill Home installed in full scale at the Venice Architecture Biennale in 2016. But you can see here that it's a very low-cost thing that can be built in a week. But even the wash basin and kitchen and other things, and it's very ergonomically designed for people who have very small homes but have proportionately the need for much more storage. So the walls are the storage. All of those sides, they develop as benches and furniture and beds and everything. And here you see that in Venice, in the exhibition, that home, and also a ferrocement sanitation unit called the EZWC. It's 4 pieces that can be just bolted together, and a roof that spans 4.5 meters can be put up in a day, actually. And the design has got 3 or 4 different slabs, whether you want to plug into a septic tank or to a situation where you can plug into the normal grid, and or completely go for dry toilets. So all that was addressed here. But most of these researches were enabled. By that stage, I started doing a lot of exhibitions. I got a lot of offers. So I started using the exhibition budgets to test things that I had not yet actually done. So for example, in Venice, we were able to produce those elements in Europe, in Berlin, with the engineers, Mike Schleich, who had a department there. I can't go to a guy who's working on large bridges and light structures with a 3-meter span. Impossible. But if we are participating in Venice, you have much more, it's much easier to do collaborations. And so we had our masons coming there and producing pieces. And you see, because I always wanted to load test, many of these things are not engineered. And we could see how, instead of breaking, it bends. That means it's ductile, and which means we have to still test. It probably could lend itself very well for seismic situations. And so these are the kind of researches that we are continuously doing. And this is a glimpse of it, some of the slabs, it's all actual ferrocement. It has been exhibited in the Maxi Rome, and this is in Louisiana Museum in Denmark. But also for the non-modular, the not prefabricated version, for larger spans, I'm also testing, for example, taking age-old origami crease patterns to be able to not only find the form, but also see whether the material being so light, can it be cast on paper? With all this Amazon trend, I started it. This was 10 years before, this is 10 years ago that we did this. And of course, this kind of material is on the rise now as a waste material. But if you could have mesh that, if you can take shells and you can create faceted shells, because it's very expensive to do form work for curves, and that's why we don't use the efficient forms of the 60s, like the early, Candela and so on. We don't go for those kind of systems in concrete nowadays because of the form work. But I was working therefore not only on the form, but also on the form work. And I found that if you have a tsunami or post-tsunami disaster structure to be built, you can take the folded paper. Nothing is wasted because the mesh is only, the triangles are not cut out of rectangles. It's just folded to become triangle. That's why we are referring to origami. So all those strips are designed according to the roll size, and then in 3 or 4 days, you can produce such a shelter. So these are just tests and prototypes, very reasonable. And there's a whole lot of research. So I started collecting all my material palettes, because this is my way of teaching also architecture through actual experience, real materials, real scale, with real people and real places, not renderings, but knowing project to project, knowing what you're doing already in architecture school and not creating the gap. And that's how I went to academia, and this is my method also actually. So everything that goes into cement, for example, we often draw walls and we just think concrete is a gray thing, or a brick is, we just do hatches and we don't know actually what's going on, that every brick has to be put in a certain pattern to be strong. So that knowledge has, when I moved to the West, I started applying. I saw the vernacular material was kind of urban waste actually there. And that this topic is very important now, because everywhere we are producing, modern life is producing huge amounts of things, but architecture, that are polluting, but architecture has the potential to permanently capture this material in its walls. And so I started exploring all kinds of things, especially with students. Like here, these books and catalogs are made into furniture. And this is very strong furniture. If you jump on it, the pages are pushed and rolled into each other. So they push against each other and you can't open. You use the natural resistance. So it's like all these discoveries that are, centered around the thinking hand by encountering actual materials. So a lot of my work there has also, expanded onto. So I was given to make this book research happen because I was given a site near in Barcelona to produce a pavilion called the Library of Lost Books. And for most temporary pavilions that are 3 or 4 months long, I feel, why should we waste anything? Take it from the waste, borrow it and give it back. So I used the vernacular kind of technology there of packing their hams and olives. I used that thing to vacuum pack the books and stiffen them, and made canopies out of that in the square. And the books are from that building next door, from the library right there. All the books that they have to regularly throw or so on. And all the furniture is also folded magazines. And they last at least 4 months. And, after the use, all these pieces, they get reused, like this is, the structure is now in some school courtyard. So anyway, just towards the conclusion, I want to say that waste materials have been used by us not only in the final product, but also in the process. Like you find in a lot of buildings you saw, sometimes the windows were adjusted to some form work that we found through whatever we found. Or, walls are sometimes, like in that ceramic, the fired house, I used beer bottles and things that you cracked glasses, etc., in the masonry, because it is also, these glass is also a vitrified product that becomes waterproof by putting it into fire. It's just a finer mix that, it is. And so all of these were used to finish the house, and let some light in. So just a little mention about my engagement as a professor in Berlin. I have, throughout all these years, this is a workshop for AA students. When I was teaching there, I really tried to plug in 1 week or 2 days or 10 day to actually build things and experience all the stages of architecture, not just the concept stage, and then go and do another concept and another concept. So in all my sites, you will see students, and in many places, you will see all kinds of materials when there is no money to do a workshop. In this case, we have filled the Tetra Pak with sand and water because we realize it's a highly waterproof, sophisticated product, and this we did in a 2-day workshop in Mexico. Sometimes I do this with students only when they have nothing, but there's an event, and instead of the drinks looking ugly in the boxes, we create installations and distribute them later during the thing. Just creating opportunities to build in full scale. This is a project in Ahmedabad with recycled denim. But I want to emphasize that the computer is useful, but not more useful than our embodied knowledge and our thinking hands. And a lot of discoveries are accidental encounters because you were just playing around and discovering much more than you set out mentally to go and solve. And so it's very much part of our process to sometimes also bring in craftsmen into the studio, or to bring in machines, or sewing machine if you're working with tensile structures, so that the studio spaces are like a laboratory. I just now want to just show you a couple of images of where all that work now landed towards the end. And this is in the 2012 Venice Biennale, where we built the whole wall house full scale in David Chipperfield's Common Ground exhibition. And I wanted to establish the common ground between the Italian architecture and the South Indian architecture, to show that we are more common than different. That was the point in this, and you see that the material up the ceiling is terracotta with a lot of wood. Also our ceiling, it's all the same things. Even the arches in Venice, it's a serendipity that the exact same rise and profile, because it's catenary, is the same proportion of the house, our profile and the colonnade. So we brought in the table from the house to there, but basically even constructed everything, the landscape, even though we were told that Venice loads are very, there is a lot of restriction in what you are allowed to build in Venice because it's going down. But when you have the knowledge and technical details, many architects, they just give up and say, okay, we'll change the design. Whereas we, because of how we work, we just asked David as engineer, what is the permissible load per square meter? And they didn't know. Then I said, on what basis is it too heavy? How much am I supposed to reduce? It's so important, I can't stress more, to ask questions and find out. People are already compromising because anybody is afraid. Nobody wants to take responsibility. So then they gave us a figure. I said, let's not talk. Give me a figure. Ask whoever. Bring it back. Our engineers will show it to you. And then we modified our foundation. And we built such a whole house within a house. So the thing I'm not showing you here today is the foundation. Guess how? But that's it. You create a spreader design and you do it. But all the other people are just changing the whole concept. It's so important to know yourself. And then we did some of the other elements with materials we found there, like the wine bottles, just to test other ideas. So, through involving my students in all of these things, at that time I was teaching in Australia. So we had some of the original Mason team who built Wall House. We had some people, some 10 students, 20 students from Australia and 10 students from Venice. And they have been, see, this is the foundation, spreading the load, only in a 15 centimeter thing. And we built the whole house. And through that, I realized when that's the thing about gravity. There's not that much, no need to mystify. It's just few things we have to know. And a lot of people are giving up on their ideas just because there is this mystification about all of those things. So anyway, we, built that, including the wet and dry works. It's because I use these exhibition budgets to teach students more things and in a short time, and also test things that I don't have a budget for. Anyway, a few more pictures. This is other projects where I'm not explaining, but the ferrocement that I showed you has enabled to make a lost formwork in this entirely concrete building to be able to reduce the concrete used in this building from 125 cubic meters to 75 cubic meters. For me, that is also sustainability. It's not like you are a sustainable architect, why are you using concrete? You know, that's what many people ask me nowadays. But I think it's better to enter into the nuances and the intricacies and not just say it looks brown, it must be healthy. It's earth, it could be just an earth plaster covering, it could be clay tiles supported over asbestos or something. Maybe just don't go by the first impression, better to go deeper. This is the image you all chose for the poster, so you know this project. You see, this is ferrocement lost. I made this formwork so that we could significantly reduce the volume of otherwise rectangular beam that would have to come there. But anyway, these are other buildings there in Auroville, the town hall complex. Here are also a lot of ferrocement, elements, but large spans enabled by concrete. This is the daycare center. A library, very humble, low budget project with Braille books. And I want to just mention that I haven't mentioned here Auroville. Most of my projects were produced, first 15 years were produced out of Auroville, being in Auroville, living there. Later, my teaching took me to other places, but I was also involved in the urban part of the project. I collaborated with Roger Angers for about 17 years, who produced this master plan. Many people misunderstood this master plan as a kind of Brasilia, but actually it is all like an interconnected thing because it's a pedestrian car-free city that he planned 50-something years ago, and there are walkways, etc., because in our kind of tropical weather, we want people to walk and use the bicycle. We will need to protect from monsoon and so on. So people haven't really understood. I was very fortunate to have collaborated with him. Actually, I had my own architecture office, but he would give me areas to detail out in the urban plan. But I also was part of the team that had got the master plan approved. So I had done all the legal aspects of the work 20 years ago. I even signed on that document which we produced to follow up. Roger was also still alive, but I had 1 foot always in the planning work. That was when I lived in Auroville. And one of these tower type structures where he was actually trying to not have standalone skyscrapers for high-rise cities, high-density cities. He wanted the low-rise fabric to be not destroyed by the single standing tall building. So he was creating horizontal movement inside them. So I continued working on many of these areas long after he passed away. But this is how Auroville has, it's prepared. The center is built. This is a youth hostel we did in the foreground, but the city is at a moment taking off. And one of the bigger urban projects that I developed in great detail is a co-housing where 60 to 80 people share facilities within a tall building. And too complex to explain this project. But basically, I have been very much also working with urban planning and new cities for the future. I have, through my teaching, etc., I've been having the occasion to, I work with very many experts across the world and consult them. When I was working for Auroville, here is Jan Gale, whose inputs I was taking. But in Louisiana Museum of Modern Art, we had built this urban model in 1:50 scale, plugging in some of my student projects students were asked to produce housing schemes into this, because we also wanted to test how this really works. And the problem, and I want to end with that, is I think in the future, where I think, and I appeal to all architects to contemplate together about what I am most concerned about going forward, is the loss of human scale in the new cities. And, nothing nostalgic. Now, I'm not coming from a nostalgic perspective, but I don't think the biological needs of humans have changed, even if our technologies have changed. So the human scale, the intimacies, the chance encounters we used to have in the narrow streets, all of that, which was destroyed by the car that replaced our mobility, have now become irreversible. But even in our tall buildings, we are looking at how to, like in these buildings, which we are seeing, how can we create those qualities and yet meet the density? Because it's a real dilemma, in India being a country with so little land and so many people, if we manage to solve some models there, then I think everywhere we could newly define how post-industrial buildings could still retain the quality of human scale that is important for our health and well-being and happiness. So I think that is a challenge. I still work on it. I don't have many answers, but I'm working a lot on urban new models of housing, because housing will enable that kind of city. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Anupama. We have time, I think, for maybe just a couple of questions. If anyone has, just raise your hand.
It could also be comments, if you want. I want to share something.
One thing I would like to ask is that, especially in the West, and here we haven't gone that far, they have a big problem with resources in maintaining those spaces. And if you know, in UK, I teach in UK, and all those spaces, common spaces that were designed to share, are always left just, they are desolate. And there's no money to maintain. And at the end of the day, after a couple of years, that's where all the crime and all these things happen. So at the moment, all councils here in Sri Lanka and probably in India, all over the world, are squeezed because they don't have resources for public services. So how can we address that? How can we create and maintain that human touch while actually addressing the urban challenges that we face?
I think, in my opinion, these outdoor spaces have many more functions. They have been undervalued. I think, especially in connection with Geoffrey Bawa, he makes the point, what those little cutouts and these little windows and courtyards, sometimes just a meter, does to the whole quality of space. And yes, if you have a window, then you will have insects, you will have whatever. I think it's a trade-off. I think it's, in my case, I prefer to live with that and clean it up and have a rich life than to have a place where I will never have to maintain anything and every time use a thing, throw it away, and just become isolated in my air-conditioned room that I never want to meet anyone. It's on the rise. I'm seeing that, but I don't see it as a problem. I feel very sorry for the people who are not maintaining what actually could keep them alive and give them a very satisfying life. I think when they would know each other, why did those things work in ancient architecture? Because when people met each other, they don't feel they are living anonymously next to somebody else, like the dormitory cities, or in the US when factory cities were created. You know, when it becomes a bit impersonal, and you want to turn into your own. So even in Bombay, when you see these apartment buildings, and you know, people tend to look inward and turn away because the outside is not pleasant and they don't know the people. And then, but by turning in, even they will know less. So I don't see a solution. I know that for the convenience of maintenance and for not having to look after, what happens is, one day the building will come down and then you have to build a new one. Had you looked after like any other thing we have, then it would go on and on. So I believe today where I am, I don't see it as a problem. I think I encourage people to take the time to look after and plan the looking after and the budgets into the rents. And you know, because we need the so-called non-functional, non-efficient places, because those are our lungs. We need it. And the more we look after it and engage, the more we are involved in our community, and then we take care of it. This is my opinion. And yeah, when I see that people are not prioritizing it, I don't think that it's a problem. It is actually what we need. There are many things, like for example, many things we do that are not convenient, like to move our body. We want to be fit, but we don't want to do it. And it's okay to do some things which we don't enjoy in that moment, but it nourishes us. That's the way I see it. I would like to have more space for useless things.
Maybe if there are no more questions, we can all gather outside where there are refreshments.
I just want to add one more thing. You know, forget about those spaces that you mentioned, even balconies, which we plan, and verandas where you could actually have a sit out. Many people are not going there to sit out because it's the AC that, because you get accustomed, you go even for 5 minutes and you feel bad. Because we have created our kind of more controlled environment, and that makes us the stepping out hard. So it is a thing, really a question I'm going to think a little more about as I go. But even simple things like balconies, people may not be using nowadays. So I take your point.
There now, and the thinking is being different. And you said you worked in Barcelona, and people in Barcelona, they are very much into, you know, living with green spaces. And I think I'm talking about London because I know a number of, I worked with housing associations with very good intentions. They created these lovely little spaces, following from little balconies and all that. And of course, if it's a sort of like a community which got some knowledge, it works well, but there are also some housing estates which were designed with very good intentions, but no-go areas. So it's just a big problem now. How do you address that? Of course, the community, they want to get involved, but you know, nobody will go there, and it's been taken over by various gangs, and I'm sure there's like that in Bombay, anywhere in any city.
But if you read the book of Jan Gehl, on life between buildings, or on the pattern language of Christopher Alexander, and see also Bawa's work, that the respect, or Charles Correa talking about the courtyard and the connection to the sky, they explain the point, and in the case of the pattern language, they also explain how to do it well. Jan Gehl explains that which of the courtyard, if you don't know anymore, just making a cutout anywhere is not going to make it usable. No. If there isn't a function, if it's not, there's a lot that architects used to know that was very masterfully crafted, And I think that urban design knowledge is also, I think the car having come in spoilt that you mentioned Barcelona, Madrid, all these cities where people walk a lot, because there were narrow streets where the car couldn't invade, and they still have the experience in their daily life of using those perfectly formed squares. These are, you can see where people gather and where people don't. So it's not just a leftover space. There is an art in creating it. If it's created correctly, then you want to look after it and have them. I think there is an art in that as well, and knowledge in it. I've just took the chance to continue this discussion since there are no more questions. But I think it's really worth seeing. And when we compare and we think, oh, it's so much work to maintain that, think of the other scenario of places where those courtyards aren't there and how it feels to be there. Then you need to have a TV so that you can even be more glued into someone else's life, and you have to create something that you have to not be anywhere where you are, but you get transported, and then you feel that it's livable. But it's not the house that is making it livable. So it's good to compare the consequence of what happens when those spaces are not there, too.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you please explain again? I understood about the
Indian, how can you are making is floor tile or terracotta and rope tile?
Yeah. But it's just, I think it's an old tradition to use terracotta tile on the roof and other terracotta tiles on the floor. But I didn't understand the question around that.
Other country, this our country,
Yes.
Sri Lanka, not good quality terracotta.
Yeah.
But Indian technology with how can make good.
I think even not only India, even in Italy and many other countries, there is a lot of tradition of terracotta. Even I see in Spain, in Albania, everywhere, people have used fired earth. But I think in a lot of modern ways of making it, we find also in India, there is an industrialized one, and the local one is not always of good quality. Sometimes it's that the people, the knowledge and, the knowledge of the artisans are not encouraged, and we also don't find a lot of things which traditionally were good quality, and therefore feel that through academic institutions and through industries and our awareness, we have to create high quality. In my case, I was able to produce this product. So when I didn't find a high quality product, I consulted this Californian ceramist whom I found. He had a knowledge about kilns and how to make the clay be harder and more refined. And so with a little bit of research, we were able to do some test samples and make the quality higher. I think we should not dismiss terracotta away just because we found somebody who did it in a bad quality. It's not to be applied the judgment on the whole material, I feel. Because I think even in modern times, people should continue comparing the value that is there in traditional, age-old practices. Thank you.
I think that I'm conscious of the time, so maybe we can continue questions and conversations outside, but also letting those who need to get back. But thank you again, everyone, and Anupama.